So historically, I'd say the web platform has really been this kind of kludge. It's grown organically into more or less a mess. It has no sense of cohesion. Most of the APIs that we have to deal with have been poorly designed by C++ developers. And they write them in this binding layer called IDL, which was originally meant for Corba, if you can believe that. And even more so than just the problems with what we already have, there's the things we don't have. There's the major gaps in what we can do on the web compared to native apps, compared to desktop apps, compared to mobile apps. And even for those things we can do, we end up doing them mostly by drowning ourselves in large JavaScript libraries that polyfill like this functionality that we need, or let us create a new select element so that we can style it. So why does this happen? What's the problem with the web, with this platform that we all love and work on? Well, the problem is really in the process, I claim. And the deal is that generally, when we introduce new features into our web platform, it's done via this complicated waterfall, this months or years of mailing list standardization, where people debate to no end like the minute details of how exactly the perfect API should work from their perspective. Then they write it down in prose or in this web IDL interface definition language, and in the end, they're really driven by this scenario-solving idea where they say, oh, we have this problem, we need to solve it. Let's throw some C++ over the wall, attach a tag name to it, and then say, oh, here you go, here's your API. So we get this fundamental capability that we want, but instead of getting it kind of exposed in a way we want to use, we get this high-level thing that just burrows down from some tag down to C++. We can't customize it. We can't work with it in the way that we'd want to if we'd written it ourselves in JavaScript. And all this time, you eventually get this thing, as troublesome as it may be. Well, you try and use it, and you end up telling the standards bodies, wow, it's kind of a huge mess, and it solves half your problems in half the time. I mean, IndexedDB is kind of the quintessential example of huge mess, but this is just a general issue with most of the APIs today. And yet, despite all of this, like somehow, as a platform, we've done just OK. I mean, well, OK, maybe better than OK. Maybe we're the most successful platform ever. How did we manage to do that? Well, there's a few techniques that we've used as a community. We've wrapped. We've said, your API sucks. Let me build a better one. jQuery is the most famous example of this, obviously. But we also do this amazing thing which is called polyfilling. We're saying, wouldn't it be cool if we could select elements in the DOM using CSS selectors, and thus Sizzle is born? Or wouldn't it be cool if we could create custom tags that had their own behaviors just like normal HTML tags, and thus something like AngularJS is born? So these are polyfills, right? Like probably this will fill in for the future of our language and of our platform, and eventually they do. But sometimes that isn't enough. Sometimes we need to transpile, right? Our language itself fails us. So we create things like Sass, which extends CSS with some pretty darn obvious features, or CoffeeScript that just gives us a more expressive language to work in. And these have their problems, but in the end, they help us a lot towards a more expressive platform. Finally, in one case that's particularly close to my heart, we even built an interoperable standard among a bunch of implementers of a certain pattern promises from the ground up. But I mean, in general, for all of these things that we do, we say we do them because we need our platform to be better, and so we need to make it better ourselves. So the Extensible Web Manifesto is this thing we put together a few months ago, saying that the standards bodies are really ready to do their part in this game, this platform that we're trying to create. Until now, we as the community have been shouldering all the work. We've been writing our massive JavaScript libraries or transpiling just to reinvent basic functionality and get what we want. But there's a better way where we work together with these bodies and these implementers towards the future. And so, one way of putting this, a good analogy, I think, is what the standards bodies have realized is that the web platform is our language. But like all languages, it must evolve. And there's two ways that this primarily happens. Two ways in which we extend the web forward, as we say. So we need to extend our basic vocabulary, our basic pieces of this language. And the second part is we need to start incorporating slang. So I want to go over some of the things, like what does this mean? When I say extending our vocabulary, there's really two key ideas here. First, we need to explain the features of the platform that are already there. So, going back to the language analogy, wouldn't it be weird if we had these compound words like sci-fi, but we didn't actually have words for science or fiction? Well, that's kind of how it is on the web today. If some standards body, maybe the French making up words worldwide consortium, just handed us the word like sandpaper, but we never actually had a word for sand or paper individually. That's the problem we face today, where we have these high-level features, but they're not built from anything that we could actually reuse and create new words out of, create new things out of. We just have all this magic compound concepts. And the second part of extending our vocabulary is giving you new low-level features that you can use, right? If you wanted to invent the word sci-fi, somebody better have come up with the concepts of science and fiction first, right? And just like that, on the web, there's a lot of things we just don't have words for. And we're slowly getting there, but still, native apps are hurting us here. They're saying, we have the ability to access this device feature. We can do the clipboard, but you can't. So we need to extend our platform in a way that takes these into account. So with this in mind, like what kind of initiatives are underway to give us this new vocabulary, this new feature of the web platform? What has the extensible web philosophy kind of yielded, and what can you look forward to? Well, the first one, the most fundamental gap in the platform, I think, is how do these darn tag things work? And custom tags is a feature that tries to explain that. Because think about it, right now, you feed a string containing some angle brackets into the browser, and then they get turned into these JavaScript objects with these wonderful APIs, and we call that the DOM. How does that even work, right? Like, what tags, how do they work? Well, custom tags explain this process. They say you register the mapping of tag names to element prototypes with the browser. And then when the HTML parser gets its string, it says, oh, well, I see this tag. Let me give you this prototype. And this is great. This is the democratization of HTML, essentially. This is saying that you are now on the same level as browser vendors when you want to create new semantics and new widgets for your web. And what's even better about this, right, is you have no more of these crazy widget libraries with their own weird semantics. No more jQuery UI with its option magic function that sometimes is a setter and sometimes is a getter and sometimes calls a function. No more Dojo digits, if you remember those. No more Bootstrap craziness, div class equals button. No more WinJS with its win control property off which all the magic happens, right? Like, just you have tags, and they turn into elements, and they behave like normal DOM things with getters and setters and properties and methods, and just like you'd expect. So now we have the ability to do this in our platform, and this is coming. But even, what about all the existing tags, right? Half the reason we have these widget libraries, these jQuery UIs, and so on, is just so that you can create your own custom select, because otherwise you can't style it, you can't customize it. I mean, in general, this is a problem with our existing platform, right? We have these tags, these magic tags like select or input or details or video, with these pieces that you can't really reach. Even something as simple as li has this bullet, which is like, where did that come from? What's the explanation for that? There's this extra stuff the browser's doing, but you have no idea how. Well, so the concept that we've come up to explain this is the shadow DOM. The idea that there's a DOM behind the DOM that you can normally access, where all these hidden little pieces, the controls, the placeholders, the bullets, whatever, that's where they live. And what's great is that once we have a basis for these hidden parts of the DOM in reality, instead of in C++ magic land, then we can hook into styling and rebuilding and extending these controls instead of having to rebuild them entirely in JavaScript with all the accessibility issues and behavior issues and cross-platform issues that come along with that. And so a couple of days ago, I was researching for this, and I saw this beautiful, beautiful line on the Blink dev forum, which I want to just take a moment to read to you, which says, I'm working on transitioning the select element from a custom renderer to shadow DOM. Tears of joy, guys. After so many years of having this horrible select element and having the designers be like, no, you need to create a custom select. Soon, we're going to be able to style select and customize it and make a combo box, and everything will be beautiful. So a good example of both adding new capabilities and explaining the old ones is web audio. Because web audio is about new capabilities in a large part. You can do fundamentally new things, like we've already seen a few talks today on positional audio, audio synthesis, really great stuff. But if you remember, the first time audio got onto the web was back in 2009. We had this audio tag, which is kind of the quintessential throw some C++ magic over the wall to you, given this high-level construct with limited customizability and just like all these restrictions, right? That's, from the extensible web perspective, the audio tag should essentially be explained in terms of web audio. And that's the direction we're trying to go. We're trying to say all these high-level things, we need a way to explain them, and audio is just a great example of that. And more generally, for new capabilities, we're getting a lot of these in the platform more and more as we go. A lot of Mozilla's Firefox OS work is pushing the boundaries here, saying we need to have all these capabilities. And so things like full-screen notifications, geolocation, and so on, this is the kind of thing that we're going to get parity with native apps. And what's cool is that we've prioritized these things. We've said, the extensible web is all about saying these are the most important things to get in the platform because these are the things we cannot do. We don't need to design a perfect new database API. We need to design full screen. Finally, the last piece of extending our vocabulary is extending the base language, JavaScript, that we work in. And the features coming up in ECMAScript 6 and ECMAScript 7 are going to give us these capabilities. And so they're kind of subtle, but for example, in ECMAScript 6, there's a lot of work going in to make sure the built-ins, things like array or date or so on, are extensible. So instead of having to rebuild the entire date parsing logic, just because you need to be able to format dates, you'll be able to do class moment extends date. Instead of and so proxies is another good example of this. Things like Ember or Backbone or so on, they all need this custom object model that can intercept all the gets and sets and method calls. Well, right now they end up rebuilding a parallel object model, saying, oh, you have to use .get, .set, and all this crazy stuff. Well, with proxies, we'll actually be able to use normal JavaScript semantics to allow you to build your own objects of the type you need. And in ES7, we'll have object.observe, which allows you to observe arbitrary properties of an object, perfect for data binding. And similarly, weak references, which is a great thing that we'll be able to use to bind view models and so on together and not have to worry about cleaning up after ourselves in this way. And so now that we have this capable platform, right, with all these new low-level capabilities, and with our existing capabilities composed out of low-level primitives, we'll be able to stop rebuilding the entire platform just to customize one piece. But there's one thing left, the second half of the extensible web, which is that we need to tighten the feedback loop between developers and standards bodies. And in short, we need to incorporate the slang that you guys are already building over and over into the platform itself. Because think about it. You've built all these great things out of low-level tools, but now you're downloading megabytes of JavaScript or transpiling from some other non-standard language and fracturing the community because you need to get your base platform up and running. This is why almost every web page uses jQuery. The platform hasn't stepped up to the plate and incorporated jQuery's innovations back in. But we're trying to change this too, right? So one of the greatest, easiest examples of this philosophy of saying, we've been doing this for a long time, let's do it, let's put it in the standard, is the template tag. Everybody knows script type equals text x handlebars or whatever, right? Like all these crazy custom script tags that you use to put your templates. Well, we finally recognize that this pattern is something that we actually need support for in the platform. It needs to be optimized and fast and native and injection-proof. And that's why we have this template tag, which is now in the spec. It's being implemented in browsers. Even more like higher level, something like dialog, right? jQuery UI dialog has been around and a venerable workhorse and a pain in my ass for many, many years. But it's the best thing out there. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we actually recognized that this is a common pattern and put it in the platform? So that's exactly what is in there now. We have this dialog tag, represents a dialog, has open, close, result, return value. We can actually say, oh, developers are doing this over and over. Why don't we do it for them? So that's what we're trying to do here. Turning to CSS, right? These basic things, like variables or reset style sheets or nesting of when you author your CSS. Well, there's actually the people in charge of CSS have realized we need to start doing this. We need to incorporate this. We need our base language not to be just a compile target, but actually something that's reasonable to write in. So there's specs, variables and hierarchies, borrowing from Sass, but also unset, which is this ability to basically create reset style sheets in one line, star, property, unset, right? And so that's the basic idea there. Pointer events, a good example. Microsoft's been pushing this very hard. But they're pushing it for a good reason, because we've got all these libraries abstracting away, saying, oh, both touch and mouse are pointers, and when somebody clicks or touches, I want to create an event. Well, of course, that seems pretty obvious in retrospect. But that's what pointer events are giving you, and now we don't have to create those libraries, unifying them and unifying these concepts. And, of course, something very close to my heart is promises. When you have a pattern that's been adopted by jQuery, by Dojo, by Angular, by Ember, by WinJS, and by YUI, maybe it's time to put these in the platform. Maybe it's time to recognize we have consensus on an async primitive, and that now we can build on top of that. So what's next? What's next for this extensible web philosophy that has brought us all these goodies and is still bringing them to us? Well, this is just a sneak peek, but perhaps the most important thing that we need to get right next is streams. So we have all these crazy abstractions with great names on the platform right now, great interfaces, great APIs like file reader, read as array buffer, yoo-hoo. XML HTTP request, best API ever. You have to pass true, not to block the browser. Get user media, right? Like there's just another example, some other way of getting a streaming set of data. Post message, you're posting these messages across iframe boundaries, and you have to build your own streaming protocol on top of that. Object URLs, which are, I think, one of the greatest, most ingenious, but also most disgusting hacks in the history of the web platform, where you're like, oh, I have this URL representing a stream of data from the webcam or whatever, and I'm going to set image.src equal to that. And we have media streams, which is this new way of saying, oh, well, stream data to the video tag. I mean, it seems like just like with promises, we're missing a very important piece of slang here that the platform has already created. And Node.js has led the way. But there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Node.js's mistakes to get something that'll work really well with the web platform and unify all of these crazy different concepts and then make our life easier. Because in the end, we want to be able to take all these different sources, URLs, which we fetch data from, camera data, binary payloads, which are in the cache already. We want to pipe them into different syncs. We want to put them in image tags. We want to put them in video tags, audio tags. We want to put them across the boundary to other iframes. We want to have custom ways of consuming them and transforming them and building things in the browser. So that's I think, one of the most exciting and most fundamental pieces missing. But another good example is something, the basic act of doing an HTTP request, right? Because think about how much complexity we have built into that system in the browser right now. There's cross-domain protection. There's redirect following. There's the actual deserialization process. If you want access to the raw bytes, that's not as easy as you'd hope. There's the cookie jars, right? Maintaining and storing where your cookies go. There's caches. Does this stuff go in the cache, or does it get pulled directly from the website? What we need to do, to provide developers with what they really need to build the kind of servers we want and websites we want, is to provide the basic building block, just the fetch. And then all of these different features of the platform are just options to fetch, or layers on top of fetch. And so that's what we'll be trying to do, is provide the correct primitive, not something as high level as XHR or as, with one semantics for script tags and one for link tags. We want something like this. Another, and this is one I've been pushing because I ask around in chat rooms, what are you missing? And people tell me over and over is we need zlib support, we need gzip, we need zip. And so there's active investigation going on. How are we going to get gzip exposed to you guys so that you can actually start gzipping in the browser, right? This is something you can write in JS. And people have probably filled this. They've created APIs that will use binary data and actually do compression in the browser, which is awesome. But the browser's already got some C++ sitting there ready to do this for you. That should just be exposed. And perhaps my favorite, because this has just happened a couple days ago, is class elements extends array. This is the new node list. No more stupid, oh, for each is not a function. It's like, no, now we can actually have something that extends array, has array semantics. You can do map, filter, for each, whatever, and that's what it'll return. And what else? I mean, what do we need, guys? What's preventing you from building the web apps of your dreams? Well, I want you guys to tell us. So get involved, right? And the best thing you can do to get involved, just off the bat with your existing skills, is polyfill, okay? So there's only so much standardization bandwidth to go around. You might think that there's these people up in their ivory towers at Mozilla and Google and Microsoft, like, I will type out specs all day. Turns out there's actually, they don't have that kind of time, right? So if you can create a de facto standard like jQuery, or an open specification like Promises A+, the world is waiting for you to take on that and to show us what the web should look like. So for example, if you wanted to figure out what a zlib API for browsers looked like, the best thing that you can do is first learn what the constraints are and what the use cases are. And not just your use case, not just Node.js's use case, and not just your I love whatever use case, right? You need to figure out what are the problems that everybody is trying to solve that'll make this a good general purpose solution. Once you have that, then you can design an API and a library to probably fill this gap in the platform, something that kind of shows off how is this going to work. And then the last step, and this is what I think a lot of kind of like the Node.js developers don't do. They're off in their little world saying, oh, we'll build this awesome thing. You need to evangelize its use. You need to ship it to everyone so that everybody sees, oh, this is the perfect way to do zlib. This is the way that this is the great API. This is general purpose, low level, exactly what we want. And so when everybody recognizes this is the clear solution for how to do zlib in the browser, it's going to be really easy for the browser vendors to just say, oh, let's put that in the standard. Done. And I wanted to emphasize that, in general, this extensible web philosophy has teeth, OK? It's not just a bunch of guys wrote a document, and now all the implementers are going to ignore them, or all the standards writers are going to ignore them. So what's cool is that the W3C technical architecture group, which is kind of the standards the body overseeing all the standards bodies, it had 4 seats go up for re-election recently. And 4 reformers, as they call themselves, were elected at once. So these people are Yehuda Katz, Alex Russell, Marcos Caceres, and Anna Van Kesteren. And so the extensible web philosophy is really something they're pushing and giving this as a mission to the technical architecture group. This is the ultimate technical body which gives governance and guidance to all of the standards and all the specs that we see. And we've already seen fruit from this technical architecture group overhaul. They've given some really great feedback, mediating between developers and between their own understanding of JavaScript idioms to the web audio group, trying to make that a more idiomatic and more easy to use and a more low-level spec, and generally just make it less magical and more JavaScript. And what's also cool is that all their work is being done on GitHub, and more specs are being done on GitHub at their urging. So this is happening. We're really starting to get a web that we want and a web that we can participate in. How to make friends and influence standards bodies. More generally, like beyond just polyfilling, the kind of thing that you can build libraries today, if you want to be involved in helping the web succeed and guide us towards better standards, right, then let's talk, okay? I mean, it's a complicated subject, but this idea of interfacing with standards bodies and interfacing with the people who write standards is something I've been diving into over the last half year or so. It started with my Promises work, but it's expanded into many other things. Finding the right approach is delicate, right? These people are very used to you coming onto their mailing list and saying, let's add array.prototype.myfavoriteThing. And then you just flip the bozo bit, and they're like, oh, well, who is this guy? We don't need to listen to him. But if you kind of approach in good faith and have a use case and don't have a prideful demeanor, they're really happy to listen. And I've had a few success stories where I've kind of talked other developers through what's a good way to approach this problem, and who should you talk to, and what channel should you use in this area already. And by this time next year, I'd love to have a lot more. And I'll be giving a talk at LXJS with this title, by the way. So stay tuned if you want to know more about the exact process. So I want to end on a hopeful note, right? Because it's easy to think about all these cool things that I showed you earlier and all these cool things that I talk about coming, and then go back to your job and get depressed because you have to support IE8 or Android 2.3. But that's really not so bad when you consider the alternative. This is the price we pay for the open, extensible, multi-platform web, as opposed to something like, say, .NET, where it's like, oh, everybody upgrade from 3.0 to 4.5. Sucks if you get left behind. That's that, and there's only one of us, so no choice. Right? We need to work through this collaborative process, cooperative process, build a shared language that we can all use together. So in the end, the future is longer than the past, and I look forward to not only living in that future, but also helping to shape it together with all of you. That's it.